Hello, welcome to another episode of Forgotten Cemeteries, Pacific Northwest. Today we're at one of Oregon's more romantic cemeteries. Apparently the Viagra cemeteries. So if you come here, you might have the irresistible urge to make love to your partner. I don't know why I just came up with that. Anyways, this would be a subscriber recommendation video. So Rebecca, if you're watching, I hope you enjoy it, and thanks for the recommendation. Today we're at Pike Cemetery, often referred to as unspoiled pioneer land, whatever that means. It's located in Yamhill, Oregon, our favorite, Yamhill County. Alternative names, a little confusing, but IOOF Lodge 56 is listed, Mount Pleasant, Mountain Bell, Old Pike, and just plain Pike. It does share a cemetery driveway with North Yamhill Cemetery. My Oregon burial site guide grouped them both together for some reason, but if you go on like Find a Grave, they split them into two separate cemeteries. However, there is a note on Find a Grave that Gales Creek Cemetery, that Pike was once named Buckingham Cemetery, so it has a few names in the historical records. But let's go meet some of the local residents and hear their story. So a little bit about the history of the cemetery, or cemeteries I guess we should say. Establishment date for both of the cemeteries per the Oregon Burial Site Guide is 1854, so pretty old cemetery. This would be on the donation land claim of a William and Henriette Dotson, but like I said, there's a reference from Gales Creek Cemetery of a man named Hiram who owned a farm in this area and gave land to his niece where Pike Cemetery stood, and it used to be called Buckingham Cemetery, and that was in the year 1853, 1 year before this cemetery was like kind of officially established. North Yamhill Cemetery over there to the left, I think that's North Yamhill Cemetery if I remember right. My Oregon Burial Site Guide says the United Brethren Church adjoined the cemetery in 1889 to 1958, so must have closed one day. Pike is listed as having 1288 memorials on Find a Grave, with North Yamhill showing 433. Pike is named for whom Pike Peaks is named after Zebulon Pike, an American brigadier and explorer. Mainly explored Colorado by the looks. His explorations actually coincided with Lewis and Clark. Obviously a pretty successful dude, and was an American general during the War of 1812 actually. Unfortunately, during the Battle of York, British forces would purposely blow up their ammunition magazine, as it was obvious they were going to lose. Zebulon Pike would be in the area and died during the explosion. He was only 34 when he died, and from what I read, his memory sort of faded from war stories as the Civil War came about. From what I know, though, Pike isn't a town or anything, just kind of a road. A book from 1990 mentioned that this area once was roamed by deer and elk heavily, but are quickly being slaughtered. A little depressing. Book also mentioned that residents are more afraid of hunters in the area, who illegally hunt at night, often with bright flashlights, freezing game, and shooting them dead. So luckily we're in broad daylight, but I guess you never know. Today we'll hear the dangers of crossing the treacherous Snake River during the Oregon Trail, hear the story of the mysterious fur trapper Black Harris. Wait till you hear his story. Someone buried here is linked to a famous massacre. A man who designed the first landscape for the state capitol can be found here. We'll meet a Civil War vet who served in the legendary Iron Brigade, and finally an individual who has Revolutionary War ties to one of their ancestors. A little heavy on the history in this one, and actually I forgot someone off the list who's a very popular American author, so we'll visit her grave as well. So our first stop, as soon as you enter the cemetery actually at Pike, you'll see Nathan S. Allen, born in Vermont in 1833. He is a Civil War veteran, serving in Company K of the Wisconsin Infantry, and not just any infantry. He served in the famous Iron Brigade. This brigade was known for its fighting ability, discipline, and unique uniform appearance. They also suffered the highest percentage of casualties of any brigade during the Civil War. To give you an idea of one of their regiments that was part of the Iron Brigade, the 24th Michigan lost 80% of their men during the Battle of Gettysburg. That's 397 of 496 soldiers to be exact. Name a major battle, they were in it. Bull Run, Gettysburg, Fredericksburg, Siege of Petersburg, and the list goes on. Apparently they were labeled the Iron Brigade because during a firefight they stood like iron in the path of gunfire, so they definitely were not afraid to die. I did find an image of Company K, and maybe Nathan is somewhere in that picture shown. I also learned that Company J was never used, and I never noticed it, but the overall accepted theory is J sounds too much like A, So during a battle, you don't want to call upon the wrong regiment and screw up the battle, I guess. At one time, the famous Civil War general, George B. McClellan, referred to the Iron Brigade as having the best troops in the world during that time. And if we have any Wisconsin viewers out there, you can visit the grave of the last known soldier of the Iron Brigade, Josiah Edward Cass, who died at the age of 102. Alright, an interesting find in our travels. I know we're heavily focused on Oregon history, but this is what I like about cemetery visits. There's always a story linked to a headstone. But let's look up Jacob Hawn here. He was born in 1804 in Genesee County, New York. I'd show you a pic, but all that came up was like a county jail and a house, so not too good on the pics in this area. Jacob was a millwright and helped out with the Whitman mission. And if you'd like to know more about the disaster known as the Whitman Massacre, watch my Union Cemetery vid. And speaking of disasters, that was my first vid, so go easy. He would move to Oregon City and be hired by John McLaughlin to build a grist mill. By 1850, he landed in Yamhill County and lived his days out until 1860, dying at the age of 56, so a little young, but Jacob has some linked history to Missouri. There's something I came across called the Hahn's Mill Massacre, which happened October 30th, 1838, one day before Halloween. This event would be classified as the bloodiest event during something called the 1838 Mormon War. Basically, it was a conflict between Mormons and non-Mormons in Missouri. No joke, there was actually commanders in this little fight, and 22 people died. Our boy here, Jacob, built a mill on the banks of Shoal Creek, Missouri. And I think Jacob here is a perfect example of when you're walking among cemeteries, you really never know who you're coming across. Hahn's Mill was established in 1835 to 1836, and as mentioned, the 1838 Mormon War happened. Jacob was the son of a German immigrant, and he wasn't exactly Mormon by the records. He built the mill, but tons of Mormons moved into the area. So some very important people in Oregon history are buried here. Not only Oregon, I'd say national as well. Here we have Alexander James Miller, and he's another example. He was born in Greene County, New York in 1829. Alexander had a passion for landscape design, and later on in life, this came in handy. We'll talk about that later. But he did come out to California via wagon train in 1848, then to Oregon in 1849, making the trip twice. However, it looks like he returned back home to Wisconsin, marrying Emily Bixby, I think that's how you say her name, in 1859. But then he would move his family to Idaho in 1864, and then the following year came out to Salem, Oregon, so got around quite a bit. But finally in 1871, he arrived in Yamhill County. In 1872 to 1873, he helped build the state capitol building. His landscape background came into play as he was the first one to lay out plantings on grounds at Wilson Park at the state capitol. He designed it with circular paths with ash and weeping willow trees. Obviously, he lived out here the rest of his days in Yamhill County, but a pretty important person in Oregon history. I was looking forward to finding this individual, and I'm glad I did. And he is way in the back of the cemetery, and headstone's very weathered and a very lonely little spot. But this will be James M Livinggood, born in 1856. Unsure where he was born or when his family came out. Find a grave profile was very vague, and sadly James died at the age of 33. Again, no info, no reason why, but very young. But appears someone out there who was a descendant of Livinggood discovered James, and then discovered that James had an ancestor who served in the Revolutionary War. More specifically, a Peter Livinggood, who served in the 8th Regiment of the Virginia Army. The 8th was also referred to as the German Regiment. So I believe that's him. That's the only one that really came up for me during like a roster search online. They did serve in some major battles, but the two core ones were the Battle of Brandywine and Germantown, and were led by none other than George Washington. I did read the 8th would eventually be merged into the 4th Virginia Regiment, and unfortunately the British would capture them during the siege of Charleston, which the city surrendered to the British. It was considered one of the worst American defeats in Revolutionary War history. Yeah, this is for all the Scotland fans out here. Here's James Coughtree, I think is how you say it. Born in 1840 in Scotland. Both of his parents were also born in Scotland and grew up there. However, it appears his mother died when James was only 10 years old, in the land of hills and heather. Didn't understand that meaning, so maybe someone out there that's familiar with some Scottish phrases can answer that. His mother was also the niece of the famous clergyman Dr. Candlish. I believe more specifically it is Robert Smith Candlish. Appears he made a bit of trouble back in the day for the church, questioning some things. Mainly, a person should have the right to choose their minister, and the independence in the church and things spiritual were like his two main arguments, so pretty noble. He made some pretty epic speeches, I guess, and gained support. His influence brought about the disruption of 1843, where 450 ministers broke away from the Church of Scotland, thus forming the Free Church of Scotland. Back to James's father, Nathan Coughtree. He would come to America in 1858, settling in Illinois. Then he would move his family to Iowa. During their time in Iowa, James would sign up with the 15th Illinois Infantry, so we have a Civil War vet here. Appears he did have a brother named William Coughtree who signed up with him, and the Illinois 15th fought in the brutal Battle of Shiloh. We talked about this battle in my previous videos, and it was one of the more violent and bloody battles during the Civil War. Sadly, James's brother William died at the Battle of Shiloh. To add, James was wounded in battle that kind of caused him to be disqualified from further service. I couldn't find out what the exact injury was, unfortunately. But in 1886, he came out to Portland, and it seemed like he kind of bounced back and forth between Nebraska and Oregon, building up his farming business. He did marry a woman named Mary Beth, and they had 12 children together. Here we have the headstone of Hiram Helton Buckingham. If you remember, the cemetery allegedly used to be called Buckingham Cemetery, because at Gales Creek we learned that Hiram gave his niece land in the Pacific area where a farm and a cemetery once stood. Obviously the cemetery is still here. Assuming the name Pike took over at one point. Not sure why. Maybe it was that road that we're by. Hiram and his wife were early arrivals, 1844 to be exact, but not on my Oregon Trail list for some reason. We talked about this before, but 1844 was kind of the year of suck. Journals from immigrants reported rain, rain, rain. Pretty much wagon trains complained of constant flooding. This would be the year, though, an odd trapper helped guide wagon trains. None other than Black Harris. There's one drawing on record of Black Harris from 1858 by an Alfred Miller. One instantly thinks he's African-American, but he's sort of referred to as a mystery guy. Nobody really knows where he was born, a date, what race he really was, or what his backstory was. A guy that really didn't talk about his personal life as well. Some say he had a Native American wife and kids, but that's unverified. So the records are just unsure if he's black or Native American. There were claims, though, that he was born to a slave mother and a white father. He's described as having gunpowder burnt into his face, tough-looking exterior, fearless as an eagle, and as strong as an elk. So quite the guy. Reports indicate nobody wanted to work with him, not because he was a jerk, but because he had pretty good endurance and would outperform his counterparts. He just wouldn't take a break. However, we do know that he was a fur trapper and guide by trade. I figure for some of these longer segments, I do just a different view of the headstone, give you a different view, maybe you could read it better. But back to Black Harris, what was odd about him was he was educated, in a sense, fully literate, and often commenting on letters, newspapers, etc. He's documented in the records of the year 1822 working for the Rocky Mountain Fur Company. Their style was a bit different, where they had no home base. Their fur trappers lived independently and fend for themselves. Sort of self-sustaining, if you will, with zero dependence on anybody, often handling their own conflicts with Indians. Referred to as true mountain men of the fur trading industry, and one of the few that challenged the big dog, Hudson Bay Company. We talked about them before. But after the 1844 migration, Black Harris would settle along the Locomoot River. That's a tough one to say. But as we found out during the lost wagon train story at West Union Cemetery, and Stephen Meek, who deserted the wagon train immigrants, Black Harris would come along and help them cross the Deschutes River. Harris would continue being a trail guide, but sadly in the year 1849, he would come down with cholera and die. It's reported that someone named Gerald, nobody knows who they are, reports Harris's last words were that he whispered to a bystander that away in the mountains from the white man, among some unknown Indian tribes, he had a wife and 2 children, the only objects which he could desire to live. From there, the burial of Black Harris is unknown. Harris was well known for telling epic stories around campfires. One of his famous stories was that of the petrified forest, where the forest petrified so fast that the songbirds were in mid-song and froze with their mouths open mid-song. It's sort of sad we'll never get to visit Black Harris's final resting place, but at least we have heard the tale of the mystery mountain man of Oregon. Alright, it just got eerily quiet all of a sudden. Oh, of course, that bird. All right, here we have William Tolbert Hines. He was born in 1803 in Kentucky, and what I think is the first burial in this cemetery. And that's because he died along the Oregon Trail in 1847 at Emigrant Crossing on Snake River. Snake River was apparently legendary for being dangerous to cross when the water was high. The reason people wanted to cross this river so badly was the southern route trail people took was known for wearing people down and their livestock. It wasn't the most pleasant and kind of risky. Many casualties were reported in the journals of pioneers when it came to attempting to cross the Snake River. In fact, most immigrants credit the Shoshone Indians for guiding them across the river and surviving. William here, as you can read on his headstone, died at Emigrant Crossing, Snake River. You notice his wife, Elizabeth Gerritsen Fulkerson Hines, is also listed on the headstone. Whoa. But she did remarry a man named Elijah Dodson, if Find a Grave is accurate. He has no headstone in his profile from my research, and unknown on his burial as well. Well, one individual, man, I looked everywhere. My wife looked everywhere. We were looking for Lutheran Morris, but I guess we'll do a nice little shot here. Here's a nice little fenced-in grave here. Not Lutheran, but he was born in 1814, and I'll put a picture of his headstone on the video. He's a member of the GAR, Grand Army of the Republic, and he was a Civil War veteran serving in the 1st Iowa Cavalry Regiment, Company F. This would be one of the more famous regiments during the Civil War, mainly because they had several engagements, even encountering the famous William Quantrill we talked about at Robert Byrd Cemetery. Their choice of weapons were the Sharps rifle, a single-shot rifle that was $30 per unit in 1861. The gun was highly popular in old Western movies and was seen in films and books. If the soldiers went melee style, they'd bust out a saber. Find a Grave lists Morris as a quartermaster as well. Pretty much their role was to make sure equipment and materials are available for upcoming engagements and missions. Alright, our final stop is of Beverly Cleary, who isn't an Oregon pioneer, but a famous person indeed buried at this cemetery. And she's on the North Yamhill side, FYI. She's listed on Find a Grave as being in Pike for some reason, but I don't know. I'd have to look at a map. They did combine the cemeteries at one point. So some of you may recognize her name right away. I wasn't familiar with her, probably because I don't read enough. But yeah, this is Beverly Cleary. She was born right here in Yamhill County in 1916 and is an American writer of children's and young adult fiction. Her books were sold all across the world by the millions. Her write-up mentioned her books were often read by middle-class children. Some of the famous titles include the Henry Huggins series, the Ramona series, and the Mouse and the Motorcycle. So that sounds kind of fun. She won a few awards and is recognized in the Library of Congress of Living Legends. Beverly died just last year, actually, at the age of 104 at Carmel by the Sea, California. So I couldn't have picked a prettier place to die. But yeah, 104 years, pretty good run by her, and a famous person buried in the cemetery. Alrighty, time for the tour. There's a gate, but the fence sort of ends down here, so you can get in no matter what. It's kind of a gravel path down there to get to the cemetery. Not too bad, not like the other cemeteries we visited. It is still an active one. There is a very epic one when you first pull in of this. It's like stained glass windows. That was pretty cool. Wonder how much that cost. Pretty neat one. I'm assuming this has some German meaning with the little kids here. Pretty quiet overall, I'd say. Might hear some country music. There's a little farm down the hill, and they're like blaring some very old school country music. Here's Hawn. Talked about his story with the famous Hawn Mill Massacre. These look like all children here. Well, maybe not. That one's pretty cool. It's like a scroll, and they kind of punched out plasma. Was that plasma cutter they used to do that? I don't know. It says U.S. war veteran checking out the cattle on 1,000 hills. I'd say that describes Yamhill County for sure. He's this popular person. That one says unknown. Don't know what that is about. James Barbenbard. Oh, that's a tough one. And there's another one that says unknown by this plot. Popular individual. Young girl. Well, next to these ones with bars, I'm seeing unknown. There's another one. Took it several times. But this would be of heirs, and we're seeing FLT, Friendship and Love. There's Buckingham. Talk about his story. Here's the one of Hines, who died crossing Snake River. I get a feeling the older ones are in this kind of zone. Maybe this was like where the original Buckingham Cemetery once stood. Yeah, because this one died in 1883. That's unique. It's kind of this tile version or something. I've never seen this before. You can see some of it's coming off, but U.S. war veteran there. We're coming up on Livinggood. One who had a maybe a family member, or maybe it was a great-great-grandpa, I'm not really sure. May have served in the Revolutionary War. Like I said, there's a ton of history in this one. And I tried to simplify my list. I didn't want the video to be too long. But yeah, he's living all by himself back here. Living good, apologies. Old school one too. This is very pretty. Park bench. Looks like they were a firefighter. Yeah. There's Tigger too. Oh, it's two of them. Guessing husband and wife. Check this out. There's a log style cross section. We haven't seen this. So it looks like it was a timber worker. That's neat. There's some behemoth over here I have not visited yet, but it looks like another logger. Let's see. Opened and ran first bar in Salts for 38 years. Wow. Oh, what a cool discovery. Let's check out the front. Oh, that's neat. Looks like they're a Masonic member. I think that's the Eastern Star Order right there, if I remember right. And we talked about that at, what was it, Masonic Lafayette. Eastern Order of the Star, I want to say. But this was a fun one with a lot of history, a lot of famous people. Got to meet a American author. Got to meet the guy that laid down the first landscape for the state capitol. That was cool. Heard some Civil War stories, Revolutionary War stories, all types of good stuff at this one. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and this was a subscriber recommendation, so thank you again. If you have any recommendations for other cemeteries to visit in Oregon or Washington, feel free to comment below. Hope you enjoyed it, and stay safe out there. Have a good one.